This had never happened to me before. I wasn't prepared for how gentle and overwhelming how quickly it reached inside me. I stood there stunned through a pleasure I didn't know I'd been missing. Before I go into the story, I just request you all to subscribe as I need it the most right now. For most of my adult life, I believed my limits were fixed. I believed I understood my own edges to things I was capable of, the lines I would never cross, the version of myself I could count on no matter what life handed me. I took comfort in that certainty. It made the world manageable, predictable, safe. But certainty is fragile. It only takes one quiet fracture for everything to shift. The night my sense of self finally broke open didn't begin with drama or intention. It began with exhaustion, with me standing alone in my kitchen long after midnight, the house humming softly around me, my phone lighting up with a message I didn't expect and pretended I didn't want. I stared at the screen longer than I should have. Sometimes the most dangerous moments are the quiet ones when no one is watching and you're forced to be honest with yourself. I didn't always this restless. Once my life fit me perfectly. Daniel and I met in our 20s when wanting was simple and the future generous. He was steady in a way that rare even then, thoughtful, kind, dependable, without being dull. He remembered details about people. He showed up when he said he would. He listened when he proposed. It less like a grand gesture and more like a mutual agreement to build something solid together. And we did. We built a home that reflected our values, orderly, full of routines that made life run smoothly. Sunday grocery trips, shared playlists on long drives, inside jokes that only made sense to us. For years, I mistook comfort for fulfillment, because no one tells you that comfort can slowly hollow you out if you stop paying attention. The change was gradual, so gradual that neither of us could point to when it began. We still loved each other. But desire softened into something polite. Intimacy became another task on the list, squeezed between responsibilities. We stopped surprising each other. We stopped wondering, and I stopped seeing. I didn't go looking for that elsewhere. I wasn't unhappy enough to justify it, not desperate enough to name the ache. I told myself this was what long marriages looked like, that wanting more was immature, unrealistic. Then I met Evan. He wasn't a stranger who swept in dramatically. He was part of our orbit, someone Daniel worked with, someone whose name came up casually at dinner. The first time we spoke properly was at a company gathering. I attended out of obligation, standing near the drinks table, half listening to conversations that blurred together. Evan didn't blur. He spoke to me as if I mattered, not as Daniel's wife, not as a polite extension of someone else's life, as me. He asked questions and waited for the answers. He laughed easily, met my eyes without looking away, and somehow made the space between us charged without ever me. I noticed it immediately, and I told myself to ignore it. But awareness, once awakened, doesn't go back to sleep. Over the weeks that followed, our interactions multiplied in small, innocent ways. A shared joke when we crossed paths, a lingering conversation that stretched a little too long, the unmistakable shift in the air when we stood too close. Nothing happened. Nothing had to. The possibility alone was intoxicating. I hated myself for enjoying it, and I loved myself for the way it made me alive. The moment I crossed the invisible line wasn't dramatic. It wasn't planned. Daniel was away on a short trip, the house echoing with absence. Evan sent a message, casual, carefully worded, but heavy with implication. He suggested meeting for a drink nearby. No expectations, just company. I knew what I was agreeing to before I typed yes. Sitting across from him in the low light of the bar, I like a version of myself I barely recognized. Nair, alert, aware of every and movement, we talked about safe things at first. Work, music, travel. Then the conversation slowed, deepened. He told me things he didn't share easily. I found myself doing the same. When he reached for my hand, it inevitable rather than shocking. What happened later wasn't about bodies so much as surrender, about being overwhelmed by the intensity of being wanted fully and unapologetically, about the way my fear tangled with longing until I couldn't separate them. I remember pressing my palm to the wall of the hallway, my heart racing, my voice unsteady as I asked him to slow down, not because I didn't want it, but because I undone by how lie I did. In that moment, I wasn't a wife or a rule breaker. I was a woman confronting a part of herself she'd kept locked away for years. Afterward, lying in the quiet, I expected shame to crash over me. I expected regret sharp enough to cut. Instead, an unfamiliar calm, a sense of being reawakened, as though someone had finally turned a light on inside. Me and I could see clearly for the first time in years. That scared me more than guilt ever could. I told myself it would never happen again. And in a way, it didn't. Years passed. The memory settled into a quiet corner of my mind. Something I didn't revisit, but never truly forgot. Daniel never knew. Our life continued outwardly unchanged, but I had changed, and there was no reversing it. The ache returned not for Evan specifically, but for what he represented: depth, intensity, presence. I wanted that again, not in secrecy, not in fragments, but in my marriage. Wanting it was one thing, asking for it was another. I rehearsed the conversation endlessly, always stopping before the words left my mouth. How do you tell someone who has never failed you that you need more? How do you ask without turning desire into accusation? The night I finally tried, it came out wrong. We were sitting together, the television murmuring in the background. I leaned into him, my hand resting on his, and spoke before courage deserted me. I told him I missed close, truly close, that I wondered if we'd let something important fade. He heard the fear beneath my words before I could soften them. The hurt in his eyes stayed with me for weeks. The silence that followed was worse than any argument. I thought I'd broken us beyond repair, that my honesty had come too late or been too clumsy to save anything. Then one evening, Daniel sat beside me on the bed and told me he'd been thinking, reading, reflecting. He admitted his own sense of loss, his own quiet fears. He said he wanted to try not to change who he was, but to rediscover who we were together. I cried harder than I had in years. What followed wasn't easy or immediate. Healing never is, but it was honest. It was slow. It was hours. And for the first time in a long while, I stopped wondering who I was capable of being. Anne started choosing her instead. I lost control, and this felt wrong, and still so right.